You can leave a conversation hours ago, sometimes days ago, and still be having it in your head. You remember what they said, then what you said. Then maybe you start wondering whether you should have said something differently. Or you keep going back to one particular sentence because something about it just doesn't sit right. You remember their expression. You hear the way they said it. You start reconsidering the context. And before long, you're not really remembering the conversation anymore. You're reconstructing it. For a lot of survivors of narcissistic abuse, this can get exhausting, especially when the conversation itself is already over and there's nothing obvious left to do about it. You may wonder why your mind won't just leave it alone. Why something that seems relatively small can take up so much mental space. Why you keep going back to an interaction you already looked at from every angle you can think of. And eventually, you may even start judging yourself for the replaying itself. Maybe I'm overthinking this again. Maybe I'm obsessing. Maybe I just need to let this go. But there's another way to understand what your mind may be doing here. Sometimes you are not replaying the conversation because you cannot let go of it. You are replaying it because some part of the conversation still does not resolve. And those are not quite the same thing. Think about a conversation that actually makes sense. Someone says something. You understand what they mean. You respond. Maybe the interaction is pleasant. Maybe it isn't. But the pieces fit together well enough that your mind can basically place what happened. The conversations that linger are often different. Someone says one thing, but something else seems to be implied. A statement doesn't match what happened earlier. An explanation sounds reasonable enough, but somehow you walk away more confused than you were before. Now you have two versions of the interaction that don't quite fit together, and your mind keeps going back to that gap. Because when you've spent enough time around contradiction, confusion can start to feel like something you're supposed to solve. Instead of simply thinking, I don't understand this yet, your mind starts looking for what it missed. Maybe I misunderstood the tone. Maybe I remembered something wrong. Maybe if I can remember the exact wording, this will finally make sense. Rumination can look like fixation from the outside while functioning like an attempt at reconciliation on the inside. Sometimes the mind is searching for coherence in an interaction that never fully contained it. And when you see it that way, the replay starts to mean something different. It doesn't automatically mean the conversation was unusually important. It doesn't automatically mean you're incapable of moving on. And it doesn't necessarily mean that if you keep analyzing it, eventually you'll find the missing piece. Sometimes what keeps the conversation active is the assumption that there has to be a version of it that makes everything line up. That if you can just remember it accurately enough, or look at it from the right angle, the contradiction will disappear. But contradiction doesn't always disappear when you look at it more closely. Sometimes looking more closely just makes the contradiction easier to see. Not every unresolved conversation contains a hidden answer. Some contain an unresolved contradiction. And once you can see that distinction, the replay itself can start to make more sense. So if you have conversations that keep coming back to you long after they're technically over, the replay itself doesn't have to become another verdict about you. Sometimes the reason you can't find the interpretation that makes everything fit isn't that you haven't thought about it carefully enough. There may simply have been something contradictory there. Many survivors find that these conversations begin to carry less mental weight over time, even before every question about them feels completely answered. You don't have to settle every question about those conversations in order to understand why they kept coming back. For now, it may be enough to recognize that there's a reason your mind kept returning to something that, from the outside, looked finished. And if you're recognizing just how much mental space has been taken up by conversations that never seem to settle into one coherent meaning, the 30-day stabilization space is something structured that you can step into while you navigate this phase without forcing yourself to figure everything out. You can explore that below if and when it feels appropriate. And if staying here and continuing to make sense of what you're experiencing is right where you are right now, there's room for that too. A conversation can be over while your mind is still trying to understand what it was asked to hold. Sometimes the replay continues not because you missed the answer, but because there was never one version of the interaction that made all of its pieces agree. We'll pause here.